Welcome to Malts and Music, a brand new podcast brought to you by the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. My name is Vic Galloway. I'm a broadcaster, author, musician, and lifelong music fan. I'm also a massive whisky fan. This podcast is inspired by my own experience of pairing up 12 single cask malt whisky flavour profiles with 12 music genres. I thought, let's do something similar. Get some creative people to pair up 5 tracks with 5 delicious whiskies. We also talk about their lives, their careers, their experiences, and go off on various tangents. Enjoy. Slange.
Ian Rankin, welcome to Malts and Music. Lovely to see you. Whiskey and music are two things very close to your heart. And whiskey's played quite a role in your life as well. Before we get stuck into our drams, tell us a little bit about the 10-year Highland Park that you were involved in for Rebus 20 and Rebus 30.
Rebus 20, there was a 20-year-old Highland Park. For Rebus 30, it's called Rebus 30, but it's actually a 10-year-old Highland Park. But the 10-year-old was for sale to the public, whereas the Rebus 20 was really just a promotional thing. There were only a few hundred bottles. But when I went up to Highland Park to do the research for it, you must do your research as a writer, they got me to sign a barrel that's still sitting there. So that's now been sitting there for well over 10 years. And if I want, at some point I can say, okay, you can bottle that, guys. And then I just have to pay the tax, which is not inconsiderable, and I end up with, I don't know, however many bottles you get from a barrel.
Really? So you have an entire cask to yourself
just
if you want
there,
to?
Just sitting there, quietly maturing.
And how long are you going to leave it?
I don't know, because being a fifer, of course, I'm very cautious about money. So, as soon as I say to them, bottle it, that's when the bill comes for the tax man. So I don't know.
That's got to be worth a few bob, though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Highland Park is incredibly collectible, and the older it gets, the more collectible. Like all good malt whiskey, the more collectible it gets. You've got a huge international range of buyers now. And yeah, I was very happy that Highland Park came on board. I've had other things. I've had beers and things, because Rebus drinks a bit. So there's been plenty of opportunity for people to get involved promotionally. And it's great. It's great fun. And going up to... I always enjoy going up to Orkney. I don't get up there very often. But more than that, I do, like my guy Rebus, enjoy going to a whiskey bar, a good whiskey bar.
What do you look for flavour-wise if you have a whole wall of whiskey available to you and you can choose anything you want? What would you normally sort of, by default, go to?
Well, my taste buds are shot, so I go for the big heavy ones. I go for the peaty ones. So it's the Lafroigs, the Lagavulins, the Cowlilas, that kind of thing. Taliskers. The very subtle ones, the Campbelltowns, some of the the Speyside malts. I like them. I like them fine. And if I'm up in Braemar or somewhere, I will happily drink a Highland malt. But if I'm out in Edinburgh or elsewhere for a night and I'm looking for a malt to drink, it'll be one of the heavy peaty ones.
Yeah, it is a flavour explosion when you go into those kind of worlds. How did you get on with our 5 drams in the taster packs and your kind of your musical pairings? Did you find it easy? Was it a bit of a challenge?
No, I mean, I kept changing my mind. There were a few where I decided, it would be this piece of music. Then I thought later on, no, really, maybe something else. Because, the first little sip of whiskey you take is one thing, but when you've lived with it in your mouth for a while, and when you've had a couple of nosings and tastings and you've had time to reflect, you sometimes change your attitude towards it and deepen your understanding of it. Mm-hmm. And the notes were great. There was notes that came with the whiskey. They were kind of funny great. There was all sorts of descriptions of flavours. I couldn't do that to save my life. I'm very... I'd be a hypnotist's dream. Because if you say to me, you say, what does that smell of? I don't know. It smells of bananas. Oh, yeah, it does. Straight away I will agree with you.
Okay, so everything is suggested to you.
Yeah, I can smell tar. Oh, yeah, I can smell tar now. I couldn't before. I'm very, very easily gullible and suggestible that way. But I loved it. I loved the taste notes. I always like taste notes. A friend of mine, Charlie McLean, is a great whiskey writer, and he's terrific. I've done blind tastings with him where he'll just pinpoint the year. Not which whiskey it is, but also the year. And you go, I can't do that. I can't even get close to that. But then he has nosed and drunk a lot more whiskey than me.
Yes, well, and that's maybe one of the greatest jobs in the world. This whole podcast, Malts and Music, is inspired by an experience I had, which was the Scotch Malt Whisky Society asked me to pair 12 single cask strength single malts with 12 music genres. And I love whiskey, but I'm not that knowledgeable. I'd put my hands in the air and say, look, I will go for sort of more extreme flavours. I'll go for heavily peated or really sort of, dried fruits, kind of dates and sweet, kind of almost sherry-ish type whiskies. But I'm becoming more and more knowledgeable, or so I think, as I go through this. And as you can imagine, 12 whiskies and 12 music genres, it's a hard life. It's a hard life. So what we're doing with Malts and Music is trying to do a sort of slightly stripped back version of that. 5 drams, 5 pieces of music. You are our first guest and you've risen to the challenge. We've got our taster packs here. By the way, we should say we're in the vault in Leith in Edinburgh, in the tasting room. It's a wonderful surrounding that we're in. I mean, it's beautiful, and we're catching this on camera, obviously, as well as audio. So let's dip into our tasting packs.
The thing I like most about the Scotch Malt Whisky Society is that it's a mystery tour. It's a magical mystery tour, because of course they're very cagey, or they want you to make your own mind up. So they don't tell you this is from there, this is from there. It's more about this is a suggestion of this, a suggestion of that. This is how strong it is. This is the style it is. So you're not buying a Caolila, you're not buying a Lafroig or a Linkwood or anything else. You're buying their whiskies. So This is cask number 39.209, Apple Aperitif.
Richard from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society was telling me all about the numbering. So the first number, so in this case it's 39, that means that's the 39th distillery that they've taken whiskey from. And the second number is the batch of casks. So in this case, it's 209. So it's the 209th cask they've taken from distillery number 39. I don't happen to know which distillery 39 is, but I know all of you whiskey nerds out there will be able to tell me, and Ian. Anyway, shall we go for it on the first one? Now, the bottle is called Apple Aperitif. And just to read a couple of the sort of details from the card which goes with it, a delicate, clean, fragrant, fruity, and subtle sweet aroma of crispy apples, like those in a Somerset apple eau de vie, greeted us. On the palate, the apples did not fall far from the tree. Fizzy, sour sweets, turnover, confit, crumble, strudel, and pie, and it goes on. Brilliant descriptions. You're already in the Glencairn. Let me catch up and pour mine as well. So, a quick nose. You can definitely taste, or sorry, I should say smell you can smell the apples, and I can get those sour sweets on the nose. Right, let's go for it. How's it tasting?
Well, as soon as it said apples to me, I thought, something almost like eau de vie. Something almost French about that. And that got me thinking of kind of French music, folk music in Normandy and places like that. And then for some reason, mandolins jumped into my head. Mm-hmm. And that's why I chose the first piece of music that I did, was the mandolin.
John Martyn, Over the Hill.
Yeah, John Martyn. I mean, John Martyn, like my guy Rebus, late at night, I've been known to sit playing a record and drinking a whiskey. And John Martyn's album, Solidaire, which I bought when I was still at high school. I've still got the same copy and I still play it. It's always the first album I play whenever I move my record deck anywhere, whenever I move house.
It's a stunningly produced album.
Yeah,
I mean, he was a master, there's no doubt about it. But I think that's his most famous album, but I think it's his best produced album and perhaps the best collection of songs as well.
Yeah, it probably is his best album. I mean, it was the one song, Solidaire, the title track, was the song I chose when I did Radio 4's Desert Island Discs. Mm-hmm. That was the one song I said I couldn't live without. But this is Over the Hill, which is track 2 on the album, because it's got lovely mandolin by, I think, Richard Thompson. Yeah, plays mandolin.
Oh, it's a superb
and it's
song.
A nice folky song. And it's, I'm going away to leave you, but he goes, I leave you in disgrace. So it's actually it's got a darker side to it. It's got an edge to it. And this whiskey it's got an edge to it. It's not just apple pie and everything else. It's also got a bit of bite.
I'm
got to
having had a little sip. I'm feeling the bite a little bit, as you say. It's funny, Solidaire. I think my favourite track on that album is "Go Down Easy." We can go down easy, and this is under the Scotch Malt Whisky Society flavour profiles. This whiskey is described as light and delicate, but I think you're right. I think it has got a bit of a punch.
Yeah, and if you think of John Martyn, voice of an angel, attitude of a devil. You know, I mean, in real life, he could be a nasty piece of work. I've read about him in various biographies, and he wasn't always the most pleasant of characters to be around. But at the same time, when he got up on stage, the delicate guitar playing and that voice, and also the curly hair, very angelic face. I guess, in some ways, he's very Scottish. He's a very Scottish musician because he manages to be angel and devil at the same time, You've got to be very careful. He's one of these people you've got to be careful around him.
Yeah.
And
a friend of mine who you've actually chosen as one of your next choice. We can move on in a second. But James Yorkston, he toured with John Martyn. It was his first real nationwide tour, and I think a good old 30 dates or so around the UK. And he saw the good and the bad of that man. Put it this way, he saw him punch a promoter out, knock him out one night when he hadn't been paid the correct amount at the right time or whatever. He just knocked him flat. And
one time I was in London, actually, I was going to record Desert Island Discs, where I was going to have Solidaire as one of my 8 records, and the one record I couldn't live without. And I was having lunch with my agent in West London. We could hear raucous sounds from a table outside on the pavement. As we left, it was John Martyn and a couple of mates polishing off their 3rd or 4th bottle of wine. And that was my one chance to go up to him and tell him what his music meant to me. No, I bottled it.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of wish I had done now, but...
Yeah, I've had a few experiences. I once interviewed John Lydon from Public Image Limited and the Sex Pistols, and surprisingly got on quite well with him. And then he said, you should come backstage at the next time we're playing in Glasgow. And I said, yeah, sure. And then when the gig came up, a few weeks later, I completely bottled it. I did eventually meet him, and he was very nice.
You have met your heroes, and he was okay. But I just felt if I meet John Martyn and he turns out to be the devil, can I listen to his music again?
Funnily enough, a friend of mine supported Jonathan Richman at the Edinburgh venue, a venue which doesn't exist any longer. And Jonathan Richman was mean, without going into too much detail, to him. And he played the show, went home that night, took all his Jonathan Richman records and just broke the vinyl over his knee.
Oh, God.
Just couldn't... And you wouldn't want that to happen to John Martyn.
No.
So we've gone for the apple aperitif... light and delicate. We've gone for you've gone for John Martyn, Over the Hill. Now, you're a massive music fan. It's documented in your books, which we can maybe mention later, but what's your preferred method of listening? Vinyl, CD, online, streaming, downloads?
Always been vinyl. My sister, when I was about 10 years old, got a Dansette record player for her birthday or Christmas one year. I've never been so happy with a gift. And I just, I would buy singles. Whenever I saved up enough money, I would buy a single. I think Double Barrel, David Ansel Collins was almost the first single I bought.
Superb track.
Yeah, I know. And then I think probably Silver Machine by Hawkwind was the second, and I've still got that.
Oh, brilliant.
But yeah, and it stayed with... I mean, I've gone through cassettes, of course. When cassettes came in, I started buying cassettes, then CDs. I started buying CDs. When the kids were young, I put the record player away because I didn't want them to damage it or the records. And then it came back out again when they were old enough to behave. But we downsized a couple of years ago, Vic. We moved from a big house to a small apartment, and half the records and CDs had to go. There was a cull. And I'm afraid it's getting time to almost cull again because the flat isn't big enough to contain all the stuff that I keep buying. And then during the first lockdown, when there was a slight lull in the first lockdown, a friend of mine went round to his house to listen to some music, and he had bought a streamer. And he let me hear it. I thought, actually, that sounds pretty good. This is a guy who knows his top-end hi-fi. So I went for a listen to a hi-fi shop on the outskirts of Edinburgh. I liked what I heard, so I ended up buying a Lynn streamer. Lynn, fantastic Glasgow hi-fi company. And music, saved me during the lockdown because I was just listening to more and more music all the time. And it's almost the anti-Amazon in a way, because if I listened to it on streaming and liked it, I would buy the vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Do you believe in, I mean, I certainly do, and I know lots of people do, and I have the feeling you do, believe in sort of if you fall in love with a record, then you want a copy of it, and preferably on vinyl. And actually, record shops and places, you know, that we grew up with, it's important to you.
Yeah, well, I think it's not just the physical listening to the record. I mean, we can discuss whether we think vinyl sounds better. It's everything else. It's the packaging. It's the fantastic artwork. It's all the details, maybe the lyrics, who produced it, you know, all that kind of information that you don't get on a download. And I like all that. I like the art that comes with a record. And also I like the arc of an album, turning it over. So a band will have consciously decided what order these songs will go in that really fits this two sides of vinyl. And I love all that. So it's not just nostalgia. I think, you know, vinyl does sound great. But if you get a really good streamer, I think streaming sounds just about as good.
Yeah.
And I don't miss the pops or clicks at all. I mean, you know, some people get like that famous John Peel quote. Someone was saying to me, you should listen to CDs because they don't have any pops or clicks. I said, listen, mate, life's got pops and clicks.
Yeah.
You know, you know, I do like vinyl for that. When I listen to that John Martyn album, Solidaire, when I put that on, every pop and click means a moment in my life. I remember how I scratched it, the party I was at, the night I was drunk, whatever. The night I left it on the floor and stepped on it. The fact there's creases in the album sleeve or this writing on the inside sleeve because I was writing some daft poem down or something about a girl I could never talk to at school. All of that is there. And so it's a whole life history in every album.
Yeah, and as we're here talking about music and whiskey, I think, you know, the ritual of putting on an album or listening to a piece of music long form goes rather well with a dram or two.
Oh, yes.
Shall we move on to our... I'm actually at the point when I've added a little bit of water to the apple aperitif, light and delicate, and it's almost over. I'm afraid you've done the same, Ian. Right, okay. I don't.
Yeah, I put a little bit of water in mine, and
You've still got a little bit left. I'm feeling guilty,
bit.
but I'm going to finish mine, and then we'll move on to our second dram from our tasting pack,
which is 36.164.
Yes,
bittersweet Christmas stocking treat. Okay. The Vaults exclusive, it says, aged 11 years.
So we have our tasting notes again without reading out the entire card. It says, an initial pineapple blast on the nose subsides to honey on toast, warm almond croissant, custard creams and chocolate hobnobs, apples and oranges in Christmas stockings, and the dustiness of rolled oats and a carpentry shop. That's excellent. Straight away, you know. Yeah. This is the thing. If perhaps you don't know too much about whiskey, or you've never been drawn to it, these descriptions, I think, really paint a lovely picture and might actually entice you to...
Yeah, there's another whiskey writing friend of mine, Dave Broom, writes superb tasting notes. You could almost just sit and read his tasting notes in a whiskey bar or something. And you'll almost be tasting the whiskey just by reading his descriptions of it. As someone who takes tens of thousands of words to say what they want to say, I am in awe. I mean, this is poetry when you can write a description of a whiskey in a few lines and capture it. I'm in awe of that. That's a poet's skill.
When I was asked to do the 12 pairings with 12 genres, I really enjoyed it, and I knew I had to keep the captions to a couple of hundred words. And I'm a big fan of kind of old school rock and roll journalism and shooting from the hip language-wise. So I tried my best. I mean, people can be a judge of whether they like the descriptions or not if they go and read them online. But for me, it was a lot of fun. But I think it's quite hard, actually, to write 200 or 300 words on something rather than, as you say, 2,000 or 3,000.
Yeah.
So here we go. This is, in the flavour profile, this is sweet, fruity and mellow. And we have a few in this sample pack which are sweet, fruity and mellow. But I think they're all very different whiskies. Christmas stocking treat. Yeah,
it's another Speyside. I mean, I know that because it says Speyside on the card. It's not me sniffing it and going, it's obviously a Speyside. But yeah, you see, as soon as I heard Christmas, my thoughts turned to crackling log fires and Christmas carols wassailing. And I thought, hang on a minute. James Yorkston, great Fife musician, from roughly the same part of the country as me. Had an album called the Cellardyke Wassailing and
Recording and Wassailing Society. Yeah.
Right. And
So it's what's it? An anagram? Not an anagram. What do you call it when you put
an acrostic.
Yeah, craws.
Craws. Yeah.
And he does a musical project, or he used to do a musical project with King Creosote and Pictish Trail, another two, Fife-based or at one time Fife-based musicians, and they would call themselves the Three Craws. And I think it was sort of, almost like saying how badly they sang together, but it wasn't true. Of course, they sounded great.
And
but yes, sorry,
James has also written a novel called Three Craws,
yes,
which I have read. Yeah, and I just thought, okay, wassailing. I mean, that sounds perfect for me. It's because I chose the hang on, which song did I choose? I chose the
very best,
the very very best, which is a breakup song. So again, we're into John Martyn territory. John Martyn is going home, but the reason he's going home is that he's broken up from a relationship. And here's a song where the narrator of the song is breaking up, but wishing the ex-partner the very very best. But then the ex-partner gets to respond. There's another singing voice on the track that responds. So you get a call and response, the way that you used to in old folk songs and ballads. And I just loved that. And it's quite a dark. The tone of the song is actually quite dark. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's perfect for winter nights. Mm-hmm. It's a very winter song. Mm-hmm. Does this smell like and taste like a winter whiskey to you?
I think there are elements of it, but quite often when I've gone through different flavour profiles with the Whisky Society, I've often thought that the deep, rich and dried fruits profile, or the old and dignified profiles, tended to go with a more kind of festive, Christmassy kind of almost Christmas pudding style tastes and flavours. This one doesn't immediately go Christmas stocking to me, but the more I sip of it, the more perhaps I'm suggested with some of the tasting notes and so on. And if we look at some of the tasting notes of sweet, fruity and mellow, watermelon, Pimm's, apricot, Turkish delight, lemon meringue pie. And I think I'm getting more of that than I'm getting Christmas stocking, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I think if you drank this in the depths of winter in front of a crackling fire, you would get it.
I think so, yeah.
But you could also drink it slightly chilled in the summer.
Yeah.
Why not? So one of the things I love about whiskey is, it's much more flexible than we used to give it credit for. I grew up in a culture where whiskey was for men of a certain age and funerals, and possibly Christmas. And New Year, that was when the whiskey came out. There was always a bottle in the cupboard somewhere, but I don't remember my dad drinking it too often, but of course he would drink it in the pub when he was with his mates. But it's moved on now. It's become a younger person's drink. It's become a much more flexible drink. And we've got access to a lot more different whiskies than used to be the case.
I read somewhere that you gave your dad a bottle of Bowmore once, and that was really his introduction to nice whiskey, rather than, we won't name brands, but sort of more blended
you might
malts.
Not, but I might. I mean, my dad ran a grocer's shop when I was a kid, pre-teens. He ran a grocer's shop in Lochgelly in Fife, and my windowsill in my bedroom was full of whiskey memorabilia. Johnny Walker, the kind of a statue of the walking Johnny Walker, and White Horse, the kind of statue of the White Horse from White Horse whiskey, stuff like that. And it tended to be the kind of cheap and cheerful stuff. Dimple, we had an empty Dimple bottle. It was this kind of almost triangular bottle, weird shaped bottle. I'm sure there's a proper word for it. That we kept sixpences in. And when it was full up, you would break it open and you would count up all the sixpences. When I was a tiny kid, I used to steal the sixpences, but then I felt guilty, so I would leave them around the house on the sofa or on the carpet, and my parents very soon twigged what was going on. But yeah, it was that. It was the cheap and cheerful stuff. The grouse and the bells of this world was what my dad tended to drink. But of course, having arrived at Edinburgh University, first member of my family to go to uni, I thought, well, Ian, you're now sophisticated. Mm-hmm. You should buy a pair of brogues and a tweed jacket, and you better buy your dad a proper bottle of malt whiskey. And I took him a bottle of Bowmore for his birthday or Christmas one year. And we both sat and enjoyed that. We loved it. And I think he got into it after that. Mm-hmm. And so I always associate, see, when I drink Bowmore, I always associate with my dad.
Yeah. And Ian Banks became a friend and something of a mentor to you. I get that impression. And he introduced you to, the world of whiskey. Would I be correct in saying
he
that?
didn't introduce me to the world of whiskey, but he certainly introduced me to the world of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society.
Okay, right.
We had a few good nights in this very building in Leith. There was a bunch of us. There was Andy Gregg and Ron Butlin. There was a few writers who used to get together, and we would go to a good whisky bar in Edinburgh, or we'd come to the Malt Whisky Society. And then we would always end up at just out near Haymarket Station at Ian Banks's favourite curry house, before he got the last train back to North Queensferry. Mm-hmm. And I remember we were sitting in a pub in Edinburgh. I mean, I shouldn't name pubs, but I will. It was the Abbotsford. One night, and he said, I've just signed a contract for a great book. We said, what is it? He said, I'm going to drive around every distillery in Scotland looking for the perfect whiskey. And the rest of us looked at each other and thought, why didn't we think of that?
Yeah.
How did he beat us to that, I was really annoyed at him for beating me to that. But it was a great book. I think Raw Spirit is one of his very best books, and it's a book that stands the test of time. I reread it fairly recently. I think they wanted me to write a new introduction for a new edition of it. And it's just a joyous book, because it's not just about whiskey. And he never does really find the perfect whiskey. But it's a book about friendship, about Scotland, about lots of things, about masculinity, about travel, as much as it is about the actual distilleries that he visits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd see quite a few different, specifically Scottish authors referencing or including whiskey in their storytelling as well. I know Doug Johnson, who's a friend of yours. Smokeheads, yeah. I went to the launch of that, and I have a Smokeheads glass in my house somewhere, which often gets filled with whiskey on a good night. It seems to be, I suppose, alcohol and the arts, or alcohol and writing, seem to go hand in hand. Does it bring the muse out within you, and specifically whiskey in this case?
I wish it did. When I was young, I thought you had to get loaded to write. I looked at people like Hemingway and William Faulkner. I looked at the great American writers who I was studying at university and thought they were drunks. And they wrote, therefore I've got to be drunk to write. And I tried it, and it just doesn't work. Mm. When you're writing, you've got to be stone cold sober and completely in control of the inside of your head. The whiskey is for later on, at the end of the day, when you sort of put your feet up and put some music on, maybe pick up a book to read. That's when you start to explore the world of whiskey. Mm-hmm. I can't do that thing where you just... it's like, I remember thinking, to write a fast car chase scene, I better put on some fast music. I put on a Jesus and Mary chain. Didn't work. Didn't make the scene any better. And certainly, alcohol. Some writers can do it and some can't, I guess, but it's never really worked for me.
It seems to, what you're saying there probably it gives me the distinction between a world-class, huge selling author and someone who lies in the gutter pretending that they're an author.
Maybe there's a bit of that as well. Yeah, there's plenty of people who wish they were writers, and they think, if I do that... The number of times I've been asked by people who want to be writers, what pen do you use? That's not going to help you be a writer. The fact that I use a big pen, if you use a big pen, that's not going to suddenly make you a writer.
Yeah, that's a strange question. Anyway, going back to our drams, we're on dram 2, Christmas stocking treat, which is absolutely delicious.
It is delicious. The more I drink it, the more I'm liking it. Actually.
I've added some water, and it's brought out a completely sort of different side to it.
But you know what? I'm also a sucker for the fact it says exclusive on the wee bottle. It says the Vault's exclusive. If it says to me exclusive, limited edition, white vinyl, limited to 500, signed by the author, I'm in there.
I know, I'm the same.
Which is why I'll be queuing up on Record Store Day like everybody else.
Yeah, I found a record the other day in a market. There was a little record stall, and I've become kind of obsessed with Chet Baker recently for some reason. It's a lockdown thing when I was in lockdown.
The singing or the trumpet playing?
Both actually. And I always thought, potentially thought he was a bit lame because he was the white guy playing jazz, not as well as the black guys. But actually, his singing is superb. The tone he gets on the trumpet is wonderful. Anyway, I found a Chet Baker record on beer-coloured vinyl, and it was sealed. And the guy that sold me it said, Do you mind if we open that? Because I'm really interested to see what beer-coloured vinyl looks like. So we did open it there and then, and it looks great actually. It's slightly unusual. It looks good spinning on the turntable as well, and it's nice heavyweight vinyl. Anyway, James Yorkston, your second choice, and another great whiskey drinker as well. He loves whiskey.
Yeah, and I mean he lives in East Newcastle, Fife, which is trying to become established as a place where distilleries operate. I actually had the privilege of opening Lindor's distillery a few years ago. Of course, they couldn't be producing whiskey because whiskey has to be laid down for a certain amount of years before it is whiskey. But I was there when he opened it, and it's a beautiful distillery and beautiful surroundings. And that's Kinney in East Neuk. And I know that there are other plans afoot for distilleries in East Neuk.
I was lucky enough to be invited to the Kingsbarns distillery opening, and I actually grew up in Kingsbarns. That's how I know James Yorkston, because his family moved in directly opposite ours, and there were 7 children, lots of people to play with. But going to Kingsbarns is always a treat for me, because you've got that nostalgia thing, the beach, and now there's a massive golf course there and so on. But having a distillery there, in a way, if we'd been teenagers there, we might have got up to even more bad behaviour. Anyway, moving on to dram number 3, Pineapples Ahoy. I've read some of the tasting notes there on the card that goes with it, and as I predict, a little bit more robust. But Ian, what did you choose musically to accompany this?
Well, I chose a kind of hybrid. I've chosen a song called Swim Until You Can't See Land, which is by Frightened Rabbit, great Scottish band, but the version done by Karine Polwart on her Scottish Songbook album. And she's a fantastic singer-songwriter, and it's an interesting, really great interpretation of the song. And mostly because it just reminds me of Scott Hutchinson from Frightened Rabbit, who sadly is no longer with us. Terrible story, really sad end to a great creative musician. But it was when the tasting notes were oily and coastal and stuff, and I was going to sea, songs about the sea. And, Swim Until You Can't See Land, is a great song, but it's also very poignant, bearing in mind how he decided to end his life. So it's got nostalgia, melancholy, remembrance in it, but also the excitement of living. Mm-hmm. The verve and the excitement of living, what that band brought to their gigs and their albums was that kind of joyous musical extravaganza. Mm-hmm. But the fact that as you were celebrating at a gig, you weren't aware that the guy singing the song was actually quite tortured. There was a darkness within him. So all of that is contained. My hair's actually going up on my arms as I'm talking to you. The hair's standing up on my arms as I'm describing it. But all of that is contained in this one whiskey for me. Mm-hmm. And it all started with that oily and coastal. Yeah. Just those 2 words. Yeah. Sparked that in my imagination.
I knew Scott quite well, and I would class him as a friend, and I admired him as a musician. And as you say, you summed it up there. People would be singing along arm in arm at a Frightened Rabbit gig, along to dark lyrics, personal trauma and turmoil, and the fact that he took his own life is, as you say, utterly tragic. And yet he brought so much pleasure to so many people across the world. The band were very successful in the States as well. Scott was a whiskey drinker. He liked a dram or 2 or 3. And I'm sure he would love the fact that you've dedicated this whiskey to
But
to
also
him as
it took me back, I talk about nostalgia, and it took me back to Big Country and Stuart Adamson. Another sad young Scottish musician lost too early because he couldn't quite handle the world around him. And he was at the same high school as me in Cowdenbeath. He was a couple of years above me, so of course he wouldn't speak to me. So again, you start drinking a whiskey and bang, 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 it leads to these reverberations. And you can end up spending hours just in thought, in deep thought. And okay, you might get a wee bit melancholy. And it's a part of the Scots, it's part of the Scots DNA and philosophy to be melancholy, but something rises from it. The fact that both those musicians left a legacy of great music that will be discovered by new fans around the world for generations to come is a positive that came out of that.
And why go for Karine's particular take on this? Because the Scottish Songbook album she put out was in 2019, and she interprets all sorts of Scottish pop classics. Dignity by Deacon Blue, The Mother We Share by Churches to bring it up to date, and all sorts of others. Why go for her version of this for this particular?
Partly because it's a gorgeous song. She's a great singer. She's got a great touch. You know, I mean, there were some interesting choices in that album. Things you would, I can't believe a folkie, in inverted commas, is going to tackle churches and various other things. But she just did it so well. And I went and saw the Great Scottish Songbook when she did it at the Usher Hall in Edinburgh. I just thought it was one of my favourite gigs for a long, long time. And there's something life-affirming about it, you know. And I thought, well, if I go for the Frightened Rabbit version, that's a wee bit of a downer. In a way, going for the Karine Polwart version brings new life to the song and brings new life to Scott's legacy.
And it's quite a faithful version, but it definitely has her kind of thumbprint on it. Anything that she touches becomes almost like a Karine Polwart song, doesn't it?
And I shouldn't tell you this, but not quite during lockdown, but nearly during lockdown, there was a tiny wee lull, and she played a private gig in a garden of a friend of mine, and me and my wife went along. And it's the last gig I went to, of course, because it was during, I think it was lockdown last year, but there was a wee lull when you could sort of get together in a garden, and she'd been persuaded to play. And it was just lovely, and she played a few songs. She took requests from the audience, and it was just just her and an acoustic guitar. There was no amplification involved at all. But it was almost like there is life. Mm-hmm. There is something. Something is coming. We're not going to be like this forever.
Yeah, let's hope we're
music
getting back
did that
to
for
that
me.
as well.
Music did that. I mean, having a glass of wine or a glass of whiskey late at night kept me going during lockdown. Writing kept me going during lockdown, and music. Listen to music, and the fact that new music was still being produced. There were no gigs, of course, but. The fact you could still listen to music by your favourite artists. I've never bought so much merch as during the first COVID lockdown because I wanted to keep all these musicians afloat.
Yeah, God bless you for that, because musicians do, without sounding too self-centered, have to kind of make pleas on social media and so on. Please, someone buy our record. Because streaming is one thing, but buying a piece of vinyl or a CD or a T-shirt is actually like kind of tens of thousands of streams worth of income in one purchase, and it really helps. Now,
and I mean, without no live music means hardly any income for a lot of musicians. It was just absolutely desperate. I was very lucky as a writer. Of course, I could still write, and the publishing industry kept turning over, and bookshops were mostly able to stay open.
They had a surge in sales, didn't they? Books.
The books sales did surge, but. Much of it was internet driven, so we're giving a lot of money to a certain guy in California rather than giving money to our local bookshop.
Oh, I see what you mean.
But in Edinburgh, we were fairly lucky in that the indie bookshops were live and could and nimble in a way that the big conglomerates couldn't do. So, for example, if you phoned up an indie bookshop in Edinburgh and said, "Have you got this book?" They said, "Yeah." You could say, "Great, can I pay over the phone, debit card?" "Yep, we'll bank it over to you." Or if you turn up at 2:00, it'll be sitting outside. Mm-hmm. And you could actually make it work in a way that you couldn't with the big booksellers. So that was quite nice in a way, and books were still being produced. And book sales, as you say, book sales did go up. Audio books went up, physical books went up, e-books went up. So, and I was able to write. Not every writer was. They didn't feel psychologically strong enough to do it. I found it a great escape. Mm-hmm. It was like I was tunnelling out of Camp COVID when I sat down to write, because I didn't have to think about it anymore. When I was reading a book, I'd go every 5 minutes, maybe I better check the news, check the figures. But writing, that all went. Anyway, let's keep talking about this. I like this. But does that feel like an Isla to you? Is it a bit less peaty?
Funnily enough, I thought the nose was very sweet and quite delicate, and then when you actually take a sip of it and let it sort of stay on the palate and in the mouth, it actually, you feel that robustness and that sort of oiliness, and that as the tasting notes say, oily and coastal. Yeah. Let's read out some of the oily and coastal flavour profile notes. Tarry ropes, oysters, marmite, olive oil, harbour walls, beach bonfire. Great. I love all of that. Yeah. And there's definitely, elements of all of those in this dram. I've added a little bit of water to mine now, and it's changed the complexity of it.
I finished mine before I got round to adding water, so let's move on to number 4.
Okay, number 4.
What a great way to spend a day.
Well, actually, before we move on to number 4, while we're pouring number 4 out, whiskey plays a role in Rebus's life. Your most famous character, Ian, Rebus, it seems to be, for the most part, he goes for Highland Parks or Lafroig's. But
anybody that will pay me, buddy. Anybody that will pay me. That's a joke, by the way.
Music and whiskey flows through the Rebus books. I couldn't imagine how many scenes you've written when he gets back to the flat and puts on a record and pours himself a dram. Why do these two things figure so heavily in his story? It's partly your story.
Yeah, I guess it's partly my story, and partly when I was starting writing these books, I was a young man, a wee bit naive. I thought, what would a hard-bitten cop do? He would listen to music of a certain generation, and he would drink, and indeed smoke, although we're not allowed to talk about that anymore. And he kind of formed himself very quickly in my head around those little kind of tropes, you know? He'll go to the Oxford bar, which is a real pub, and he'll drink whiskey, and he'll drink IPA, and he'll go home and have a fish supper, and he'll listen to John Martyn, or the Stones, or Van Morrison, or something. And
it sounds like a mirror image of your life, really.
I know. I mean, too much of it's too much so. And yet, I have said to the taxman that my bar bills should be tax allowable, and the HMRC says no. So
anyway, it's research.
Yeah, it's research. Listen, I get all my best ideas in the pub, you know. There's no doubt about it. And I do love finding a new great bar. And whenever I go anywhere in the world, and of course, as a writer, I do travel widely for book tours and festivals, I always look for the bar. And I'll go online now, I'll go on Twitter or something and say, hey, anybody live in Saskatchewan, Saskatoon? Anybody know a good pub in Saskatoon? And people go, yeah, you've got to go to so-and-so. You'll love it. It's just like, it's a Rebus bar. Boom, I'm there. And it's great. You know, there's one of my favourite bars outside Edinburgh or outside Scotland is in Ottawa, Chez Lucien. And just somebody said to me online, they said, listen, if you're going to go to Ottawa, you've got to go to this pub. It's a Rebus pub. And as soon as I walked through the door, I went, yep, I'm home. Actually, it wasn't quite a Rebus pub. It's got a jukebox. I'm not sure Rebus would go for a jukebox, but it's got a great jukebox. And they do burgers, they do food, not just booze. But the feel of it, the fact everybody's standing at the bar chatting, it's got that it's got the crack. It's got the thing that I like about whiskey is a communal thing. You sit there and you chat to each other while you're drinking it. A lot of the time, I used to come into the Scotch Malt Whisky Society with Ian Banks and Andy Gregg and various others. We would talk the whole night away. Didn't need music, didn't need TV, didn't need anything. We would just talk. And I love that about it. And going to a new bar, if it's a good bar, that's what you want. You want to listen to the conversations. Mm-hmm. You don't need to have music playing or TV on or anything, or game machines, anything like that. No, gets in the way.
Yeah, well,
let's pour this.
As a music obsessive, I play music all the time in the house, and I work with music. But I do enjoy coming to the Scotch Malt Whisky Society and sitting back and having a dram or two and maybe a bite to eat. But also just having the grandeur of the space in the building, without a sort of blasting soundtrack or anything like that in the background.
That's very good. That was very good. You should release that.
Beatboxing.
Yeah. So what have we got here?
So we're now on Meemaw's Moon Pie, which is an incredible name for a whiskey.
I don't know.
Dram number 4.
I don't know where that came from.
We're going in.
Yeah, I'm going to pour the whole thing. What the heck?
We're not slurring our words yet, are we?
Well, I'm starting to lose the power of speech. My teeth are going numb. Apart from that, I'm absolutely fine.
So this is, again, it's under the Sweet Fruity and Nello tasting profile. It's a Speyside, it's 9 years old, and it's a first fill ex-bourbon barrel. And just before we get your music choice, let's read a little bit off this card. The nose is a breath of fresh air, burgeoning spring foliage, cut meadow grass, flowers, and a basket full of tropical fruits, melon, pineapple, kiwi, orange. There we go. It does go on, as I say, on the tasting card, but that gives you a little example.
Yeah.
But
nose,
Again, sweet, different from the first.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite chewing gummy.
I know what you mean, though.
Kids sweets, cheap kids sweets.
Juicy fruit chewing gum.
Yeah. All those really, really cheap sweets you used to get in Lucky Bags and stuff when I was a kid. But you're not old enough to remember Lucky Bags.
Oh, I do. Kingsbarn's local shop had Lucky Bags.
But that's it for me. It was Lucky Bags. It was childhood because the taste notes again: coconut cream, iron brew, milkshake, condensed milk, fudge, wagon wheels. Took me straight back to childhood, and took me back. I mean, it took me back. I think is the thing. And also Meemaw's moon pie. Meemaw. It's a noise you make to make a police car, right? Mm-hmm. Meemaw. Moon pie. I'm not so sure about. But that kind of youthful exuberance, all of that, took me back, and I thought, okay, something I liked when I was young, music I liked when I was younger. And the Skids were a really important band to me when I was in my teens, possibly to you too. Not Definitely. You to the band, but to you also. But, they were the Fife band, and Stuart Adamson was a couple of years above me at Beath High School, and, we all used to go and see them every gig they played. They played them. Fairman would go. They used to play the Pogo a Go-Go Club in Kirkcaldy, which was the station hotel. And we used to go along every Sunday night, and they were usually there. There was no stage, so they were playing at the same level as the audience. And we'd lie down and do the die and fly or whatever. We'd sort of do or the robot would bounce up and down, or the pogo, with all these weird dances. And it just, it really took me back. So I thought, yeah, the Skids, and the Skids, I love the Skids anyway. So I thought the Saints Are Coming. Mm-hmm. The Saints Are Coming would be the song for this.
And funny, you sort of said U2 earlier on. They and Green Day covered this, and I think
great video.
Yeah, and I think they brought it to a huge global audience. I mean, the Skids are not a band that didn't reach an audience; they have a global fan base as well. But I was glad that they took, Dunfermline's finest and.
But that was an amazing song because that was a fundraiser for the flooding and hurricane in New Orleans, and the video they shot for it was incredible, because of course the Saints weren't coming. Nobody was coming to save these people. These people were on their own. I think the video almost ends up saying, if only the Saints had been coming. But, the band were amazing. They were great, and they came from Fife, and we were so happy, because before that, the Fife band was probably Nazareth, who were a great band, obviously. But when punk came along, of course, when punk comes along, you want your band. You're not going to go to London to see a band, or Manchester. You want your band, and the Skids were it. Mm-hmm. And so it was part of my youth, was dressing up to go to the gigs, going to the gigs, seeing people you saw at every gig, buying the records, talking about the records. I was in a band called the Dancing Pigs. Mm-hmm. We played about 6 gigs, and we went into a recording studio twice. And we were going to approach Stuart Adamson, our producer for a single. Whether our keyboard player ever did get in touch, I have no idea. But that was the plan. All fell apart.
You are on record as saying, in fact, I think you've said it to me directly in the past, that although you've had a wonderful life as a writer and an author, that you've always wanted to be a rock star. Yeah, it's since childhood to the present day.
Since childhood. But the thing is, I've had a better life than that, because I get almost all the accoutrements of being a rock star without the hassle.
You've also, let's be honest, you've made some records as well.
No, I made 2, I guess. One record with my band Best Picture, a 7-inch single, and then the Jackie Leavin album, which was a CD.
Also there's the Ballads of the Book with Aidan Moffat.
That was one track on Ballads of the Book. Yeah, I did the lyrics for that, and Aidan Moffat sang it. Yeah, that's true. That was.
And you featured on St Jude's Infirmary.
Yeah, a tiny bit. St Jude's Infirmary's second album, was it? And I did a wee bit of lyrics for them.
But that's quite nice to have a foot in both camps.
Well, yeah, it's not made me my fortune though, And I'm quite happy doing what I do. But no, it's been lovely. I mean, touring with Jackie Leavin. I tried to get a Jackie Leavin song in here, and I couldn't quite find one that fit. That was amazing. I just loved hanging out with that guy and touring with him and making an album with him and everything else. But it's all been good. It's all been good. I mean, in Best Picture, my band that I joined about 4 years ago, I mean, that's a stuttering thing, because with lockdown, of course, we've not rehearsed or done anything for a year and a half. So whether we still exist or not is kind of hypothetical at the moment. But yeah, there's a lot of connections. When you talk to a lot of writers, you find, A, they love music a lot of the time. B, they've been in bands or want to be in bands. They are singers or musicians themselves. But then, there's a kind of weird wheel. I think we've spoken about this before. every time I speak to an actor, they want to be a musician. Musicians all want to be filmmakers. Filmmakers all want to be writers. Writers all want to be painters or something. It just keeps on going around. It's like anybody who's creative isn't happy doing what they're doing. They want to be doing something else, but they've not quite found the niche yet. And I don't know if I would have been any good as a front man for a rock band.
I've seen Best Picture. You weren't bad.
Yeah,
Queen's Hall.
You didn't see one of our best gigs. We've done better gigs than that. But I mean, our last gigs. Oh my God, our last gigs were supporting. Who was we supporting? It was in Glasgow. I forget. But it was 2 years ago, Christmas 2 years ago, and it was good fun. But we were just starting to get good when lockdown came. Hey-ho.
Is there a future for Best Picture?
I don't know.
Can people listen to your music online?
One track on YouTube, maybe.
Okay.
Shall we move on? We've got one more to go.
Meemaw's Moon Pie, soundtrack by the Skids. The Saints Are Coming. Phenomenal piece of punk rock, new wave from the Scared to Dance album in 1979, which if you don't know, you should search out. It's a benchmark and a great record from that period. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, this is nice. It's nice.
It's I think it's smoother than the Christmas stocking treat.
It's somewhere in between what we've had. It's sort of between the first ones we drank and the kind of heavy peaty one we drank. It's somewhere in the middle. I like it.
And for my last sip, I'm going to add a little bit of water to it. And then we go for dram number 5. Is this some kind of world record, 5 drams in a podcast?
No, because there are whiskey podcasts. You know this, right? There are whiskey podcasts where all they do is drink whiskey.
Yeah.
We're amateurs. We are.
Yeah, no, we are amateurs. I'll take that.
If you're enjoying this, you should start your own whiskey podcast. Banana Balaclava. Celebrating EU members, I like that. Celebrating EU members. Nothing political in that, guys.
No.
Age 16 years. 60.8%. Wow.
I know.
Okay. We're ending with
Banana Balaclava.
Yeah.
Right, okay, let's pour this into the old Glencairn.
What does it say about it?
Do you want to read some of the notes, or shall I do that?
Hang on, I'm just looking for I've lost my place. Here we go. What have we got? Nose engulfed by senses with a comforting shroud of blueberry muffin, sticky baklava and Turkish delight. Insulating layers of marzipan and cocoa butter, cocooned apples, quince jelly and juicy fruit gum.
Doesn't that sound good already?
Wow. 16-year-old Speyside, first fill ex-bourbon barrel.
Yeah, 60.8%. And
I mean, it's almost medicinal on the nose. It's almost like antiseptic. There's not a huge amount of flavour there. Again, we've had within the tasting profile of sweet, fruity and mellow, we've had 3 different whiskies, which usually with a 5 dram tasting pack from the Whisky Society, you get 5 completely different profiles. Yeah. But this just must be the kind of, the bottles that they're focusing on at the moment and the distilleries they're focusing on. So there happen to be 3 sweet, fruity and mellows in there, but they're all quite different. Certainly on the nose, I've not had a sip of this Banana Balaclava yet. That is a hefty dram.
Is it?
I'm going to put a wee bit of water in that.
The nose is superb, it really is. It's one of the best noses of the 5. And let's go through.
Now, this is one of the ones where I had to actually change what I was going to, because originally I'd put down Fergus McCready North from the album Cairn, which is you won't know him because you're a rock guy. Fergus is a fantastic Scottish pianist. He's the closest we've got to Keith Jarrett, jazz pianist.
I do actually know his music. He's not,
and it's very, very. I mean, Cairn is a great album. It's a fantastic jazz album, but it's also very Scottish. It's all about Scottish, especially the Highlands, the rough, kind of craggy nature of the Highlands and everything else, as the name Cairn might suggest. But then, having done all that and written notes in it, I scored all that out and put in the Blue Nile over the hillside. And now, why did I do that? I don't know why I did that. I just suddenly thought, over the hillside.
And we've bookended the 5 drams with John Martyn Over the Hill, and now we go to the Blue Nile Over the Hillside. Now, a lot of people, perhaps not just outside of Scotland, the Blue Nile are an international band, but they're not necessarily a household name. But certain people who love the Blue Nile don't just love them, they're obsessed with them. They're completely, overcome with emotion when the Blue Nile is even mentioned.
It's called nihilism.
Yeah, indeed.
It's called
as is the
nihilism.
book about them, yeah. Now, what is it? Can you sum it up? I mean, we can compare it to the whiskey in a second, but what is it about the Blue Nile that sets people alight so much?
I was playing the album just recently. I played a lot of their stuff recently. It just doesn't age. It doesn't age at all. If you picked any of their albums up today, you would swear they were recorded yesterday. But they're recorded decades ago, some of them. They were the house band for Lynn.
I know, you mentioned, I was going to mention them earlier when you said that.
The hi-fi manufacturer in Glasgow. And Lynn wanted to start a record label up. And for some reason, they picked on the Blue Nile and gave them lots of money and said, go away and come back when you're happy. And they spent years producing A Walk Across the Rooftops, their first album. And it was beautiful, and it showed off Lynn record systems to their best. But the band were incredible perfectionists, so it took them 20 years to do 3 albums. There's only 3 of them in the band. I can't believe there's only 3 of them because the sounds were extraordinary. But just, it sounds as fresh and different, unusual, quirky, left field. Now, you'll know this. A lot of Scottish bands who are revered are never going to make it on the world stage as stadium fillers. They're too left field. They're different. They appeal to a minority audience, whether it's Boards of Canada or Cocteau Twins or Jesus and Mary Chain or the Blue Nile, whoever it is. There's something in the DNA of Scottish music that says we would rather do our own thing than try and be populist. Mm-hmm. And I think the Blue Nile were part of that. They were perfectionists and they wanted to make the stuff they wanted to sound. It didn't matter what the media were saying they should do. We're just going to produce what we want to produce. And Over the Hillside is lovely. It's great because it does take you over the hillside. It's like you're driving a car up to Ardnamurchan or somewhere. You're getting out of Glasgow. They're a Glasgow band. Get out of Glasgow, head north. And you're going to hit the Highlands. You're going to hit all these amazing places, these great views, mists, low sunsets, all the rest of it, coastal scenery, as you go over the hillside. And I just thought, yeah, perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is from the second album, Hats, which I think I prefer the first one. I think there's a slight sort of freshness and almost naivety to it that I love beyond Hats. But Hats is a masterpiece, and they're the right band to be the kind of, to be linked with a hi-fi company because the precision in the recording, as you say, it sounds, studio exemplary now, and it was recorded decades ago. I mean, It could have been released yesterday, as you say. There is something special about this band. Now, I understand that it's not to everyone's taste due to the uncompromising nature of it, but actually, they're really easily accessible in some ways. It's quite opaque. It's quite sort of broad brush strokes in terms of the musicianship and the synthetics and the synth sounds on there. And Paul Buchanan's voice is just stunning. But there is a sort of, I wouldn't say immediacy, but people can listen to this music and understand something and feel connected to it immediately, I think. And
there was something else that hit me, which was that we had John Martyn, I'm going home, I'm going back. I thought, where's he going? He's going back to Scotland from south of the border. Over the Hillside is kind of a similar thing. You're coming back home. You're heading home. It's almost like the connection with Caledonia, the song Caledonia. A lot of these musicians are doing songs about, I've tried this lifestyle. It doesn't suit me. I'm going to go back to where things make sense. And where things make sense is their childhood home, which in many cases is Scotland. And I just love that sense that you're heading back. Because he's going, I'm going to head back over the hillside. I'm going to go over the hillside. I'm going to get away from the life I've got, which is not happening for me. It's not pleasing me. A wee bit like Dignity, Deacon Blue. Here's a guy who's worked all his life so he can get out of that life and do something else with it. With the John Martyn song, guy's got to get away from the life he's got and come back. And here it's the same thing. These are people who are having to leave a life behind that hasn't worked for them and get back to something that does make sense. And I connect with that because I went to London, went to France, lived there for a few years, and I just itched to get back to Scotland where things made sense.
Mm-hmm. They're a Glasgow band you mentioned, but you're now and have been for many years an Edinburgh man, as am I. It's difficult to leave Edinburgh. It has to be said, it's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. What continually fascinates you about Edinburgh? It's through almost every book
It's a
you've ever
TARDIS.
written.
Edinburgh's a TARDIS. It's a very, very small city that contains multitudes. It's much bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. You can walk around it in a day, but it can take you a lifetime to get to know it. I've been living here for donkey's years and I still don't really know it. And it's got all the attributes of a big city, but it's small, it's livable, it's workable, it's everything. And it's got great bars. It's got a few good record shops and a lot of great pubs.
And it's got the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and we're in the vaults in Leith having a few drams. Banana Balaclava is the last one. The current book, Song for the Dark Times, is the 23rd rebus.
I've no idea.
And the 8th, Malcolm Fox.
I have no idea.
Anyway, there's been a few before.
Yeah.
And it's doing brilliantly and on top of all the bestseller lists. As you must be getting bored of that now.
No, you never get bored, man. You never get bored if we're going to number one. When you hit number one, I mean, if you don't hit number one, you get a wee bit peed off. So, yeah. But my next book is actually, it's finishing a book started by the great Scottish novelist William McIlvanney, another guy who liked to drink. And he wrote about a detective called Laidlaw. And at his death, he left a book unfinished. And his widow asked if I would try and finish it. So that's called The Dark Remains, and it's set in Glasgow, and it comes in September.
Right.
So hopefully I've done him justice.
I'm sure you have. It's been an absolute pleasure sharing a few drams and talking music. Two of your favourite things, two of my favourite things. You are our first guest on Malts and Music, and I know this is a relatively short podcast. We could do it for another couple of hours and never get bored of talking about music and whiskey. Thank you, Ian Rankin.
Slange.
Thanks for checking out Malts and Music. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember, we are building a playlist of all the tracks discussed. You can find that on Spotify. And for all your whiskey needs, unfiltered, Whisky Talk, and so much more, head along to the website smws.com. I'm Vic Galloway. This is the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, and I'll speak to you in a month's time.